Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged, and let's get rolling.
Now, on to round two of the Daily Show's Can You Take It challenge.
World-famous Empire State Building is the latest target of bedbugs.
A hardy little creature that likes to suck blood.
Consider them the vampire of insects.
From movie theaters in New York to a fire station in Connecticut, business high-rises, and welt-covered college students, by some estimates, a 500% increase in the bedbug population.
My God! They've learned math! By the way, the scariest thing about bedbugs, no place is safe.
Bergdorf Goodman department store acknowledges it's hired a dog to patrol for bedbugs. An Abercrombie & Fitch store had to get rid of them. And Victoria's Secret says after proactive testing at one of its stores, it had to deal with them.
Wait, Victoria's Secret? I knew those weren't sequins. Yes, I'm wearing women's underwear. And things have gotten so bad at Abercrombie & Fitch, some of their employees just take off all their clothes altogether. The bedbug infestation has been a boon to exactly one type of person, bedbug experts.
While everyone is trying to get rid of bedbugs, bug expert Louis Sorkin actually welcomes them. Sorkin shows us what a bedbug looks like after it's drawn blood. And to keep his specimens, he allows them to bite him, picking up a container with thousands of them to his arm.
Do people think you're crazy?
So, is there a Mrs. Mad Scientist? As with any public health menace, the key to fighting bedbugs is education. And the Sundance Channel and beloved children's entertainer Isabella Rossellini have risen to the occasion.
These little creatures infest our dwellings. They could hide any place in our apartments, but the place they love best is our beds.
Is this going to get weird?
Bedbugs have penises like knives. Females don't need any genitals to mate.
He is so strong and sharp. Oh. He ejaculates in my wound.
That may be the worst Isabella Rossellini fragrance tagline ever. Infestation. He ejaculates into my wound. All right, it's a little weird, a little avant-garde, but we're learning a lot about bedbugs. And I think this serves a very important service to teach us about these pests.
500 eggs would hatch. And the baby bedbugs would feed on the blood of whoever sleeps in the bed.
What, that's it? That's the end? You just told me my bed is filled with bugs who have dicks, knives, knife dicks. And now you're not going to tell me how to kill them? Rossellini! No!
Well, guess who else has bed bugs? That's right, the New York Times. There are now reports out that evolutionary perfected blood-sucking creatures have infested the New York Times building. And I'm not talking about their reporters. It seems the newsroom of the nation's paper of record is now infested with bed bugs. Multiple New York Times staffers shared the news on social media Monday. The famed newsroom has an infestation of bed bugs. According to an internal email sent to employees obtained by Slate magazine, the bugs were found in the wellness room on the second floor, on a couch on the third floor, and in a booth on the fourth floor this past weekend. The email went on to say that, quote, evidence of possible bed bug activity was found in a few personal lockers on the third floor, and that treatment is underway for those whose lockers were contaminated. Assistant editor Stuart Thompson shared the news on Twitter, of course, because you always want to tell the entire world our company is infested with bed bugs. He did that before columnist Sopan Deb, apparently a trucker, joked that he had ordered shields up and phasers to be set on stun in order to combat the critters. Now, I know that President Trump was joking when he said that he was the chosen one, but I'm not really so confident that he can call down plagues upon the enemies of the American people like the New York Times. You know, the problem of bed bug infestations has been growing in this country, and perhaps the most interesting aspect of the report is that these insects are found generally where people sleep, which I guess could explain an awful lot about the editorial decisions of the New York Times. They're asleep at the wheel. Although the presence of bed bugs, the story reports, has traditionally been seen as a problem in developing countries, it has recently been spreading rapidly in parts of the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, other parts of Europe. Bed bugs have been found in five-star hotels and resorts, and their presence is not determined by the cleanliness of the living conditions where they are found. Bed bug infestations usually occur around or near the areas where people sleep. These areas include apartments, shelters, rooming houses, hotels, cruise ships, buses, trains, dorm rooms, and I guess I have to add now, newsrooms. Yes, newsrooms are asleep. Now, the discovery of bed bugs inside the New York Times has led to some, what I would consider to be rather entertaining social media analysis. Liz Cheney tweeted out, "And all this time, I've been thinking that the rats in the newsroom were the problem." Mike Bavals tweets out, "Of course, he sided with the New York Times newsroom bed bugs when Brett Stevens wrote an opinion piece. Actually, bed bugs are very good. The left has much to learn from the quiet dignity of the humble bed bug." So I think that Mike was right when he says that the New York Times newsroom sided with the bed bugs. Roger on Twitter tweeted that the New York Times was shocked to find that there are blood-sucking parasites in the office who they have not been paying $100,000 a year. Now, I guess the good news is bed bugs are not known to cause disease in humans. Obviously, in the Jon Stewart bit, there was a scientist who was letting bed bugs bite him so he could study them. But bed bugs and Times reporters and pundits actually have two things in common, I think. They both can be annoying, and they're both, well, difficult to get rid of. Don't wake anybody up at the New York Times. I'll be right back. And as long as we're speaking about the New York Times, a New York Times editor says that this policy that we have in the country of birthright citizenship, even for a U.S.-born child of illegal aliens, which we often refer to as anchor babies, has been, quote, enshrined in the Constitution for more than 150 years and cannot be ended. Now, obviously, that's not true. It is not enshrined in the Constitution. To date, the United States Supreme Court has never explicitly ruled that the children of illegal aliens must be granted birthright citizenship, and I could cite you 100 legal scholars that dispute the idea entirely. But despite that, the New York Times, the editor Patrick Lyons, writes that birthright citizenship cannot be ended because it is enshrined in the Constitution. Maybe he's one of the bedbug-infected sleepers that, is asleep at the switch. He wrote this: "Does the Constitution guarantee birthright citizenship? Why, yes," he says. "The 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." And then he asks, can the president abolish it? And the answer is, he says no. The president cannot amend the Constitution, and an executive order trying to end or restrict the right to citizenship of persons born in the United States would almost certainly be challenged in the court, which of course it would be challenged. Do you think that those on the left are going to leave that decision unchallenged? Of course they're not. And he says that it would be challenged as a violation of the 14th Amendment. Kamala Harris chimes in, obviously, and similarly claims that birthright citizenship is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. But it is not. It is not. Birthright citizenship is not based on the 14th Amendment. Why do we have the 14th Amendment? Because after the Civil War, who am I kidding? Why am I even going into this history lesson? If we had an educational system that actually taught rugrats about the Constitution, I wouldn't need to do this, but here I am doing it anyway. The 14th Amendment was adopted post-Civil War because of Jim Crow laws in the United States, particularly in the South, that refused to recognize freed slaves as U.S. citizens. And thus we got the 14th Amendment. You know, if we ended birthright citizenship, it would actually put us in line with almost all other Western civilizations. In the developed world, only Canada has a birthright citizenship policy. There are at least 4.5 million anchor babies in the United States, and nearly 300,000 anchor babies are born every single year. But do you think Congress would do anything to reverse birthright citizenship? Of course not. It's not a constitutional question. It's a political question. And the political question is, do we want to continue to entice we talked about bedbugs, so let's talk about fireflies. Let's talk about gnats and flies and wasps and any other bugs that are attracted to a bug light. Our immigration laws, our asylum laws are like bug lights, and they just attract people. And do you think Democrats are going to get rid of that? Do you think they're going to turn off that bug light in order to kind of disincentivize people from coming to this country and having anchor babies? We even have anchor baby tourism. Oh, you're in your 9th month of pregnancy? Let's fly you to the United States, where you can give birth in a U.S. hospital, and your baby will now have dual citizenship. Or let's just sneak you into the United States illegally. You can have a baby, and then they can't kick you out because you're the mother of a anchor baby, a birthright citizenship baby. And so now you can go on the government dole like a bunch of others, and we'll pay for you and we'll pay for your baby. Yes, it's a bug light, and it's time to turn it off. Hang on, I'll be right back. Let's do a taxpayer relief shot. This comes to us from WAAY 31 ABC coverage, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Story goes here's the headline. Investigators, Limestone County man shot, killed son in self-defense and will not be charged.
Welcomed an 86-year-old woman and told her there was no reason to be afraid, that this street was safe. I never felt unsafe.
Brenda Haraway says she's lived on Corey Lane for 25 years and never imagined a shooting would happen just across the street.
I heard sirens, and when I hear a siren, I always make it a habit to pray. And then I realized the sirens were closer and that there were blue lights.
Haraway says the blue lights were in her friend's driveway.
I love them. I'm praying for them. Mr. and Miss Adams are good people. They've been married over 50 years, and I know they love their children.
According to investigators, James Adams shot and killed his son, Alfred Adams, after an argument. That's the only information they'll give right now. It's something neighbors still can't wrap their heads around.
I'm sure it had to be a self-defense kind of thing, because that would never happen. I mean, they're a fun-loving family.
In the meantime, neighbors tell me they'll be praying for the family involved.
It can happen to any family. We have to get God back in our lives and our families. Our children need God so very, very desperately.
This street is all going to be all behind them. Prayers for them, please, because they're the sweetest couple.
So here's how the story goes. According to investigators, 70-year-old James Adams shot and killed his son, 44-year-old Alfred Adams, after an argument. Investigators said the father went to his room to go to bed, and the son, Alfred, opened the door, entered the room, and that's when they said James shot his son in the chest. Now, obviously, the neighbors are really upset about it, but there was apparently an argument, and apparently the father felt for fear of his life because they've already determined that he killed his son in self-defense and will not be charged. If I get additional details about exactly what the argument was about or how the father felt in fear of his own life to justify a self-defense shooting, I'll let you know. Another one, a man shot by homeowner during an attempted break-in, cops say. This comes to us from Flint, Michigan. A man is in critical condition after he was shot by a female homeowner during what Flint Popo are saying was an attempted break-in. Officers with the Flint Police Department responded on Sunday into the 300 block, blah, blah, blah. An initial investigation by the Flint Police revealed the man had fled the Keller Avenue home where he had attempted to break into a residence and was shot by the homeowner. The man was later found at a single vehicle crash near Dayton Street and Brunel Boulevard, less than 1 mile from the home. No additional charges or no additional suspects are at large. Yes, you break in or you attempt to break in, you run the risk. And I think the more people question whether or not, do I want to break into this house or that house? Yeah, they might have a gun. Our next taxpayer relief shot comes to us from Charlotte, North Carolina, courtesy of WBTV. A suspect is shot after running over a bondsman while fleeing in South Carolina.
Bondsmen are recovering tonight after being hit by a car driven by someone they were trying to capture in Clover, South Carolina. This happened at about 9 o'clock last night in the person's neighborhood. Authorities tell us he was wanted for not appearing in court in Gaston County. WBTV's Paige Peroso joins us live from the York County Sheriff's Office. Paige, is this suspect in custody?
He is in custody, but recovering at the hospital after one of those bondsmen shot him after he was hit by the car. Two bondsmen were looking for 24-year-old Christopher Davidson Thursday night after he failed to appear in court while out on bond. They found him in a quiet neighborhood near Clover, South Carolina.
Dangers are always there. We know that when we take on the job.
The York County Sheriff's Department says Davidson was in his car when the two bondsmen confronted him. He ran one of the bondsmen over and struck the other with his car. Before Davidson was able to drive away, one of the bondsmen shot him once in each arm. All three men are expected to be okay. Other bail bondsmen working in South Carolina says danger is just part of the job.
At the point when a bondsman is going after someone like that, they're usually a fugitive of some support at that time because they have failed to appear in court. That's usually the case. You know that the person's already trying to flee from the law. Being very cautious and being very careful in that, we have to be.
Neither of the bondmen will face charges, according to the York County Sheriff's Office, because they were acting in self-defense.
Boom. Acting in self-defense. You know, you're a felon or you're wanted on a bench warrant or whatever it might be, and you've skipped your bond, and now the bondsman's after you, so you try to run him over with a car. You're probably lucky you didn't end up DRT, dead right there. Shot him in both arms. I'd like to think the bondsman was a really good marksman. I honestly believe, though, the dirtbag's just lucky that those shots hit his arm and not his chest. Hang on, I'll be right back. You may have heard recently about the case in Oklahoma where Johnson & Johnson was found guilty of somehow causing the opioid crisis in Oklahoma, and they were ordered to pay a fine of in excess of $500 million, or as the news likes to report it, more than $500 million. You know, the attorney general that prosecuted that case is is an old friend of mine from way back, decades ago in Oklahoma. Mike Hunter is now the Attorney General, and I've not studied the case closely. So I cannot comment on whether the verdict is good, whether the case is something I agree with or not. All I know is what I read in the news. And I've not studied the pleadings. I've not looked at the court's order. But I do know what the news is saying about the case. And what the news is saying about the case is twofold. First, you probably hear that the Oklahoma case is probably going to force a similar case in Ohio into a settlement, and that it may serve as a precedent to go after other pharmaceutical companies for the opioid addiction in the country. Now, at first glance, just on a 30,000-foot level, I've got somewhat of a problem with these cases. Yes, they're manufacturing drugs, but they are not the ones who are putting the drugs into the hands of the patients who are abusing them. Who's doing that? The doctors. Well, there is one doctor who has been sentenced to, I think, 150 years in prison in Florida for distributing the equivalent of something like 100 opioid pills for every citizen of the state of Florida. It was that bad. That guy deserves to be in jail because it was obvious what he was doing. But is the manufacturer of an opioid responsible for the actions of a doctor? Well, the argument kind of goes like this. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but the argument kind of goes like this. Well, because of the distribution channel and because you're distributing the opioids to a particular distributor, now you're already one step away from, you're 1 degree of separation from the doctor. You're giving, Johnson & Johnson does not, I don't think, Johnson & Johnson distributes the opioids directly to doctors. They distribute them they manufacture them, and then they distribute the opioids to a distributor, a pharmaceutical salesman, who then sells those drugs to individual doctors or clinics or hospitals or whomever. So now the manufacturer, Johnson & Johnson in this case, is 2 degrees of separation at a minimum between the manufacturing of the opioids and the prescribing of the opioids by the doctors to the patients who are then abusing them. So I've got somewhat just of a philosophical problem about this, and the philosophical problem extends to the news media in their coverage of these cases, who now claim that this could be a precedent for guns and for gun manufacturers, and that they should be held liable for the so-called, I'm now using air quotes, for the so-called gun violence epidemic in this country. Well, that's not so far away. State legislatures are finding ways to pressure banks to stop doing business with gun manufacturers. This whole tactic of pressuring firearm-related businesses was pioneered by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Fredo, although he's not really the Fredo. And now this is spreading to California. California Assemblywoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove, a Democrat from Los Angeles, has introduced a resolution to urge, quote, banks that have open demand accounts with the state to evaluate their relationships with gun manufacturers and adopt lending practices that protect citizens before profits. Oh my God, I hate that. That phrase drives me nuts. Citizens before profits. What about grocery manufacturers that produce bread, that produce orange juice, that produce eggs, that produce bacon and eggs, the ham, the steaks, whatever? Those people are making a profit, and the wares that they're peddling are causing heart disease in many cases. Well, let's protect citizens before profits. This resolution in California says that demand accounts with 6 banks that concurrently lend to gun manufacturers which are Bank of America, Citibank, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, Union Bank, MUFG, U.S. Bank, and Wells Fargo, according to this assemblywoman, California has more gun laws than any other state in the union. Hence, instead of proposing new laws, her resolution, quote, intends to affect the proliferation of guns by urging 6 nationally chartered banks to curtail their relationships with gun manufacturers. One, I don't like, and I find it repugnant, the idea of using the power of government to coerce or pressure legitimately operating businesses, banks. I don't care what you think about Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, Union Bank, or Wells Fargo. You may or may not do business with any of them. You may be like me, and you're just by inertia you're still doing business with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo drives me up the wall. But just because of inertia, I'm too lazy to go through all the problems and the hassle of changing my accounts to another bank. But I don't like the idea of government coercing or using their pressure to say, hey, you want to do business with the state of California? Then you need to stop doing business with gun manufacturers. That's un-American, and quite frankly, I think is the kind of tyrannical government that we're all afraid of, and it's right here in front of our eyes. If major banks refuse to extend credit to gun manufacturers, the borrowing costs for gun manufacturers is obviously going to increase, which would reduce industry investment in additional capacity or new business lines or new products, and the result could reduce the proliferation of guns not only in California but across state lines, according to her press release. Somebody over at The Truth About Guns interviewed this woman, and she said that she sat with banks and bank associations in California as a courtesy and to encourage their members to come to the table and to partner with the state to expand solutions to the gun violence epidemic outside of using the penal code. In other words, let's go outside the legal system and let's figure out a way to use the power of government to coerce businesses from doing business with somebody else. First they came for the banks, then they came for the gun manufacturers, and then they came for the egg producers, and then they came to the bacon producers, and then they came for you for whatever you produce. And I still have a problem. You know, a car is a lethal weapon in the hands of the wrong individual. Who's the wrong individual? Well, it could be a drunk driver. It could be like the dumbass woman that plowed into the rear end of me, probably on her phone. Although it didn't kill or injure anybody, it cost a hell of a lot of damage to my brand new BMW. I know, first world problems, right? It could be a drunk driver. It could be a careless driver. It could be someone that's just, mad on a suicidal mission. So a car, an automobile, in the hands of a dangerous, reckless individual can become a lethal weapon. When the car manufacturer, when they manufactured the car that I bought, did I have to go through some sort of background check to see if I was going to use the car in an illegal fashion? No, because nobody would even consider that to be a rational thing to do. But instead, what we now have is the idea that there is a nexus between whatever the product is and the end user, despite the fact that a manufacturer of a car, a golf club, a baseball bat, a firearm are once, twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times removed from the actual end user who takes that car, gun, golf club, whatever it might be, and turn it into a lethal weapon. But in this country, we don't care about that stuff anymore. All we care about is let's use the levers, the power, and the coercive ability of the government to interrupt and disrupt free markets. But Michael, if it saves one life. Okay, well, if it saves one life, then let's stop the manufacturing of cars. Let's get back on horses. Let's get back to walking or just riding bikes. Oh, that's what they want to do in the Green New Deal anyway, so maybe I better shut up about this, because that is precisely what they want. That's exactly what they want. This dumbass Congress or assemblyman from Los Angeles said, quote, "We need to be having a conversation about banks and how they lend. This cannot only be about red flag bills. I'm sure that many people killed are also customers and clients of banks. Doesn't that deserve some consideration?" That's the dumbassery on the left. You eat too many steaks. You consume too much alcohol. You eat too many fatty foods, too much fast food. Let's just hold everybody liable for everything. And let's just have a constitutional amendment that says individuals that reside within the confines of the territories and states of the United States of America are no longer personally responsible for anything that they do. Because that's where we're headed. Hang on, I'll be right back. I know we all get frustrated and we go to a restaurant. Tamara and I were and friends were at a high-end Mexican restaurant on Saturday. It's a place that's difficult to get into. It is very well known. I'm not going to mention its name right now, but you can figure out what I'm referring to because, they used to be in the Highlands, and then they sold that giant house that the Mexican food place was in, and they relocated to a place across the street from the Brown Palace Hotel. And it's smaller, so it's more difficult to get in. But it's the kind of place, I'll just be honest. I'm embarrassed to say this, but four of us, not counting tip, spent $108 on Mexican food. I know I'm embarrassed by that. In fact, we looked at each other when we got the bill. And do you ever do that? You get the bill and you look at it because you think, well, that can't be right. So you look through the itemization of everything that you ordered. And then suddenly as we ordered that. And then you start looking at the amounts. And then you add it all up and you're like, holy crap. Yep, it's accurate. Well, of course it was accurate. They're not going to try to cheat you. But never in our wildest dream did we sit there thinking that we were ordering $108 worth of Mexican food. So I tell you the dollar amount to tell you that it is, quote, a high-end Mexican restaurant. We ordered dessert. And this is the frustration that I'm talking about. We are seated in a large booth, and unfortunately there is a POS system right behind us, a point of sale system right behind us. So the waiters and waitresses, can you call them that? The wait staff? They're constantly going back and forth there to enter the orders and, to get everybody's bills and stuff. And so it's a little distracting. And my back is to the POS system. So when we order dessert, the waitress brings one dessert, but fails to bring the second dessert. And I don't know whether that was a miscommunication on our part or a misunderstanding on her part. So what I did, trying to find her as she left, I turned to my left, craned my neck all the way around to the point that I was actually staring at somebody at the point of sale. Why am I doing this? I'm actually sitting in my studio, turning around. I am doing exactly what I did in the restaurant that night, Saturday night. I turned around trying to find our waitress, and I can't see her, but I see someone who is standing at the point of sale system. Our eyes make contact with each other. Now, if I was the manager of a restaurant or the owner of a restaurant, I would train my employees. You do whatever it takes, whether it's your table or not. If you walk by and you see that someone is looking for their bowl of salsa is empty, or if you're standing at the point of sale system and the person in the booth in front of you turns their head all around, isn't that the the American Sign Language indication for, hey, I need some help here, the person just ignored me. We had to get a manager. I tell that story in detail because we all get frustrated at restaurants at times. But one woman in the United States has taken spectacular umbrage at being denied a treat to help cool off in the hot summer weather. She went to McDonald's, and at McDonald's, all she wanted was a cold ice cream. It went like this.
This is getting
Now, of course, the minute this melee started and the chaos ensued, in the video you can see other customers backing off, running away, except 4 or 5 who obviously, because this is what we now do when violence breaks out anywhere, we grab our phones because we might be instant celebrities on YouTube. But here's the best part of the video. So this woman is pissed off because she couldn't get her ice cream or she couldn't get whatever it was that she was ordering. So she immediately starts into this rampage, throwing things. I mean, she's ripping stuff off the shelves. She's throwing stuff at people behind the counter. She is on a tirade. The best part? The employees at the McDonald's start throwing the thing, whatever she throws at them, they pick up and they throw back at her. So rather than retreating back to the confines of the kitchen, hiding behind the fryers or hiding behind the cheeseburgers, no, they pick up stuff and they start throwing back. Oh my gosh. I guess I should have just stood up in the high-end Mexican restaurant on Saturday night and picked up whatever was left on the table and just started throwing it and demanding, where's my ice cream? Where's my sopapilla? Where's my whatever? Because after all, this is America and it's 2019. I'll be right back. Well, I just want to say one thing. La Loma. Speaking of McDonald's, a Florida man, age 34, is charged after punching a McDonald's worker in the face at a drive-thru window because his food was taking too long. Sherman Lee Brown, age 34, allegedly hit a McDonald's drive-thru worker in the face. It's claimed that he yelled, "Cracker," and "Hurry the F up" before punching her. She was left with redness and swelling to her eye and cheek and a cut on her lip. It's claimed that he hit her after getting upset that his food was taking too long. What is the appropriate amount of time to wait in the drive-thru at the McDonald's before you call somebody a cracker and then you punch them in the face? Now, here's what I find fascinating. I want you to go to any drive-thru. Go to Wendy's, go to McDonald's, go to Arby's, go to the Chick-fil-A. No, don't go to Chick-fil-A because I don't want those people are nice. Don't go hit the Chick-fil-A people. Well, I actually don't want you to hit anybody. But I want you to drive up to a drive-thru window somewhere, and I want you to remember this story. And then as you're waiting for your Diet Coke, or you're waiting for your cheeseburger, you're waiting for your fries, whatever you're doing, maybe you're at Taco Bell and you're waiting for your bean burrito. I want you to look at the person in the drive-thru window. Now, assuming that you're not in some gigantic Ford F-150 truck with gigantic tires on it or something, but you're just in a regular car. Are your arms long enough to actually punch somebody in the drive-thru window? Don't punch them, but just kind of stick your arm out with a fist, not in a threatening way, but just stick your arm out and see how far you can get your arm inside the drive-thru window. And then report back to me and let me know whether or not it is actually possible to punch a McDonald's drive-through worker in the face. And then I also need to know, because, these things are important. We need to let everybody know, because we can. We can save the cheek. We can save the swelling and redness of one drive-through worker if we can just understand what the appropriate wait time is. Maybe we need to start putting signs up, like you go to the DMV and you're number 867 and you see somebody sitting there and they have number 122. Well, we need like a wait time. Around Denver, I haven't seen them in a long time, but we used to have these billboards that would say, hey, come to our hospital. The ER wait time is only 2 minutes. Well, we need a wait time at every drive-through. Your wait time is approximately 3.5 minutes. And I hate to do this to you, but as long as we're on the discussion of McDonald's, we'll just call this entire podcast episode the McDonald's. A Maryland cop has found himself being publicly shamed after making his way behind the counter to get himself a milkshake. The cop, who identifies himself as a sergeant, can be seen slurping ice cream from the top of a smoothie cup in the District Heights in Maryland. But he's challenged by a member of the public who is complaining that the officer did not pay for the drink. When I've had conversations with cops about this, oftentimes if I see a sheriff's car, a deputy car, or state trooper or somebody in line behind me, I'll pay for it, because, maybe they've run my license plate. I don't know. But I've paid for a lot of cops' drinks, coffee, snacks, whatever. And I'm not saying it to brag. I'm just saying that I think that's what cops should do. If other people want to, in incognito, pay for their lunch, their Diet Coke or whatever, let other people do that. It's a way of us saying in an incognito way, without wanting, getting glory or thanks for it, let us pay for it. But I've told cops that I've represented, cops that are friends of mine, don't accept free meals, free food when others are watching you. It sends the wrong message. And I would say that 99% of cops that I've talked to agree with me, and they do want to pay for their own food. And they appreciate it when others pay for their meals or pay for their drinks or whatever. This cop, I think, is totally out of line. He helps himself around the counter. Now, obviously, he's either done this before, or the workers at this particular McDonald's in District Heights, Maryland, are too shocked to say or do anything. But there's one guy in the McDonald's watching, and he starts recording.
Licking a smoothie. You a whole officer? What the you doing behind this is my smoothie. Is this your McDonald's? First of all,
did you pay for it? Did you pay for it?
Get your whole supervisor up here. Watch what the I do. Yeah, get a supervisor up here.
What's your badge and name, sir?
Watch what I do.
What's your badge number?
Hey, watch what I do.
Get your supervisor out here.
You a bad ass. I ain't never seen no like this. Oh, I know you don't gotta tell me.
Now, I want to pause it for just a moment, because these people are upset because the cop has gone behind the counter and he's getting his own, he's made his own smoothie or whatever it is. And as the filming starts and they start to berate him for doing so, he continues to work up and down the counter. Maybe he used to work at the McDonald's. I don't know. But he makes matters worse by not paying for it and continuing to just serve himself behind the counter.
What's your badge number and your name?
Why are you reporting me this is Saturday?
Man, all that is irrelevant.
Because it ain't yours.
This is a public lobby, ain't it?
It's public.
Yeah, this is.
Well,
yeah, it is.
Where's the owner? Where's the owner at? Number right here. Right. 301. You about to call the owner. Can you read? For Mr. Hart. Can you read? Can your mother read? You ain't supposed to be back there. Can you read? Their handbooks say your big ass ain't supposed to be back there, you dirty. You mad? You don't have no gloves. Your mother mad. Go buy some McDonald's. Your mother mad. Yeah, I need a supervisor up here to the McDonald's.
That's enough of that. But I'm really irritated at this cop. For one, he shouldn't have just walked behind the counter. I mean, he actually had to go into the door. You know, there's usually a door that's locked between the counter and the kitchen area. It's usually off to the side. So somehow he walked into the back, behind the counter. Either somebody let him in, or he knew the code, or it was unlocked, or whatever. If it was unlocked, then that raises a whole nother security issue. But the problem that I have is, when they started filming him, and they started asking for his badge number and the supervisor, and started, to some degree, harassing the cop, instead of engaging them, he should have just walked away, got in his patrol car, and driven off. And instead, he argues with them. And he shouldn't have put himself in that position in the first place. I think I'm out of McDonald's stories. So herein ends the McDonald's portion of Michael Brown Unplugged today. Hang on. I'll be right back. Politico has a story about, well, here's the headline: why some lesbians don't want Pete Buttigieg to be president. The subhead is, lesbian political activists are divided over which glass ceiling to aim for in the 2020 presidential race. Now, before I talk about the Politico story and why lesbians oppose Pete Buttigieg, I want to talk about identity politics for a second. You've heard me talk about how identity politics is just going to be is the bane of American civilization. Well, the Democrat Party, somewhere, someplace, sometime, found this non-issue of oppression and decided that they were going to use it to create a voting bloc of the oppressed. Now, in the Democrats' mind, the idea was that everybody, if you could put them into a particular group or a subgroup, they could be convinced that there was a small group of oppressors that were oppressing them. And in fact, it's almost like it's easy to find large groups, but the Democrats recognize that if they can wean that down to even smaller and smaller groups, and then for those smaller groups say, oh, look, you're being oppressed, and you're being oppressed by the evil whatever, pick whatever it is you want, then that is identity politics in a nutshell. And it enables the Democrats to therefore use that in a way that really is anti-American, in my opinion. But the result of all of that, identity politics, a term which I've been using for quite a while, I don't think is really understood. Dr. Jordan Peterson was one of the first to explain the roots of identity politics. If you go to his Wikipedia entry, here's part of what he is written about him. Peterson states that postmodern philosophers and sociologists since the 1960s have built upon and extended certain core tenets of Marxism and communism while simultaneously appearing to disavow Marxism and communism. Dr. Peterson says that it is difficult to understand contemporary Western society without considering the influence of a strain of postmodernism thought that migrated from France to the United States through the English department at Yale University. Dr. Peterson says that certain academics in the humanities, quote, started to play a sleight of hand, and instead of pitting the proletariat, the working class, against the bourgeois, they started to pit the oppressed against the oppressor. That opened up the avenue to identifying any number of groups as oppressed and oppressor, and to continue the same narrative under a different name. I don't know whether Dr. Jordan Peterson has control over his Wikipedia site. I mean, I clearly don't. If he does, power to him. But that's a brilliant summation of identity politics. He was early in spotting the roots of this situation, which he broadly and correctly refers to as an element of cultural Marxism. Now, the Democrats have taken that and they have made hay to some extent by identifying a lot of these oppressed groups, and in a lot of cases only recently informing them that they were indeed oppressed. They didn't even know they were oppressed until the Democrats started telling them they were. How did this happen? Well, it happened with some carefully orchestrated publicity stunts. Here's a good example. I think the transsexual toilet law controversy is a good example of this, because they were able to point out oppression. It caught a lot of people flat-footed to only be embarrassed by their lack of compassion, their lack of understanding, their lack of wokeness, their inability to understand, well, anybody with any sort of other gender identification ought to be able to use any restroom. The political correctness, which became a methodology of free speech control, has mutated into an instrument of thought control that's now been adopted, and quite frankly and unfortunately, I think accepted by a lot of Americans, and I think by everybody in the Democrat Party. There might be a few exceptions here and there, so maybe I shouldn't say everybody in the Democrat Party. I mean, Bill Maher, to some degree, recognizes the problem with this. I think, I can't think off the top of my head, but I think there are some exceptions to that. So maybe let me back off and say not everybody in the Democrat Party. But you say or do something outside the prescribed limitations, and they want you to lose your job. They want you to lose your career. They want you to lose your livelihood. The rules that make up the politically correct infrastructure have somehow become organic. It's taken on a life of its own. And new rules crop up all the time. You've heard me talk about and joke about. We need a rule book. We need a Newspeak dictionary and a Newspeak, thesaurus or some sort of bibliography that describes to us what we're to accept and not accept. I think an example of this finding oppressed and oppressors is an example of how you take hate speech and put it into identity politics. The most onerous are the considerations for hate speech, which is protected speech under the First Amendment, but which is prohibited by political correctness. Let me emphasize that. Hate speech is protected speech under the First Amendment, but it is prohibited by the god of political correctness. Now, this is the case despite the fact that hate speech is ill-defined. I have said 1,000 times, what is hate speech? Because like most politically correct anything, I don't think it's generally applicable. In essence, hate speech can only apply to the oppressed. It can never apply to the oppressors. Let me give you an example of what I mean. You can hate crackers. You can hate white men because they are now generally identified as the oppressors, born to a supposed genetic royalty. And now the white people are tagged with white privilege, even though I don't believe there is any such thing as white privilege. Think about when Eddie Murphy, the comedian, the idea that there is no white privilege was mocked by Eddie Murphy when he put on whiteface in one of his Saturday Night Live skits and found that by being white, everything was free. Everything was great just by putting on his whiteface. You think he could do that today? He would be excoriated by those on the left. But white privilege is the necessary element, although it's an artificial construct. You need that element to make identity politics work. Because if you're going to define groups of oppressed, what do you need? You need oppressors. You can't be oppressed unless there's an oppressor. But why not a single homogeneous group? Well, that would fly in the face of what the Democrats want to do, which is to identify as many oppressors as possible, because once you identify an oppressor, you can find oppressed. Now, you could work it the opposite way, too. You could, in your mind, identify groups of oppressed, knowing that you've already identified groups of oppressors over here, or you could find any particular group, find some subset of an ethnicity, some subset of race, some subset of sexual preferences, whatever it might be, and now you can tag them with oppressors. It's nonsense. But the backlash for all of this is huge. This whole direction that we're going, that stems from a Marxist ideology, I hope turns out to be one of the biggest mistakes ever made by the Democrats. There seems to be nobody in the Democrat Party who's equipped to deal with it, because standing up against it would not be politically correct. And the media is right there with them. All of these trends about oppressed and oppressors, political correctness, and what you can and cannot say, for example, that's going to get worse and worse, in my opinion. And I don't think there's any alternative strategy on the horizon, which gets us back to Politico. Campbell Spencer, the story says, a lesbian and political consultant, moved to Washington in the 1990s to work in the LGBTQ advocacy. She wooed gay and lesbian voters for Al Gore, worked to stint in the Obama White House, and now serves on the board of the LGBTQ Victory Fund, which this year issued its first ever endorsement of a presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg. Talk about identity politics. Why do you think they endorsed Pete Buttigieg? One single issue: identity politics. He fit one of those stovepipes. He was gay. He was married to another man. He fit exactly what they were looking for. But now they don't want to talk on record about their opposition to Buttigieg because they don't want to damage his campaign. You see how identity politics actually works against them? They chose him because of his sexual preference. Now they're upset because he might break a glass ceiling, a gay man becoming president, over a woman becoming president. Now they're in conflict. Which identity politics, which identity stovepipe, which identity do they go with? Now they're conflicted because they've created oppressed and oppressors, and now oh my gosh, we have an oppressed man, a gay man, running for president, and but we really wanted a woman to win first, because are women more oppressed than gay men? What if we find out that one of the female candidates for president, what if we find out one of them is gay? Oh, now we have a Hobson's choice. What are we going to do? Are we going to go for the gay man, or are we going to go for the gay woman? Well, I think in the world of identity politics, they'll go for the gay woman, regardless, irrespective of her political views, her stances, or anything else. They'll go with her. Why? Because it's a larger pool. All women, and all women plus a lesbian woman. Oh my gosh. Now the pool of potential oppressed and oppressors, female and gay females, just broadens the voter base that they get. And Pete Buttigieg, initially endorsed, well, they might just start to ignore Pete Buttigieg because we can't have a gay man beating a gay woman. I love identity politics. It is the death knell. At some point, maybe not in my life, but at some point, identity politics will destroy the Democrat Party. It'll be an implosion like we've never seen. I hope I'm around to see it. Hang on, I'll be right back. So one quick factoid about glaciers and climate change before we end the podcast, this episode. But before we get to that story, let me remind you and ask you as a favor. If you listen to us on iTunes, if you could give us a 5-star rating, that would be fantastic. And if you have time to leave a short, just 1 or 2 sentence review about why you like the podcast, if you could do that on iTunes, again, fantastic, and I would deeply appreciate it. Likewise, I really appreciate it if you follow me on social media. And the easiest way to do that is to go to my website, michaelbrowntoday.com. Now, I've got a team of people together. They're going to revamp the website. That'll be happening pretty soon. But you can still go to the current website, michaelbrowntoday.com, and across the bottom are all of the icons to follow me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. All of those are across the bottom. And I ask you to follow me on social media, because as we expand the podcast and as I make a large announcement probably on Friday's podcast about something that I'm going to be doing starting on Tuesday after Labor Day, those social media interactions will become even more important. So if you can follow me on social media, that'd be fantastic. Now, I want to get to this last story real quick. I'll just do it very quickly because I know we're running out of time. There's a story about a 1,000-year-old forest buried under Alaska's Mendenhall Glacier. So as these glaciers, expand and retreat as they calve and some break off, well, in recent decades, North American glaciers have advanced by many kilometers and buried forests in ice in the same regions where glaciers have receded and uncovered medieval era forests. And in fact, in one area, students are learning how scientists combine living and dead trees to create millennial-linked records of temperature, such as the buried forests emerging from the wasting margin of the Mendenhall Glacier. What is it showing us? Well, it's showing us that where the glacier is now, there used to be a 1,000-year-old forest. And that 1,000-year-old forest tells us, oh, there was a warm medieval period. Oh, so the climate does change. Always has, always will. I think the whole hysteria over climate science is about to come to an end. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I'll talk to you tomorrow.